What's up, y'all? Sorry about
Success.
that.
Thanks for bearing with us.
Alright.
Yeah, it's
We
cool.
see you in the
Yeah.
chat. We're coming.
Yeah, this is
Ah.
thanks. This is actually our most highly attended live stream to start. So thanks for joining us and for hanging out.
Oh God, and the chat is already humming along. So Dana Beal wants folks to know that conference organizers routinely give someone the shaft. The bushy-haired stranger has confirmed we're in the right channel. And yeah, tickets were expensive as hell. This is also where, right, Chakruna set up a scholarship to try to have more people be able to attend the event, but then said that they were not at all affiliated or involved in the event. Strange times. So I think Normie's queuing up the video. Pace has... there we go.
Returned.
Peter Addy in the chat. Hey, Peter. I think we actually first met at the Psychedemia conference that Nishay had put on in 2012 at UPenn. Here we are a decade later.
And there's Austin Hagler. I just
Yeah.
saw him at the most recent Psychedemia at Ohio State.
And Austin was also there before.
What's up, Austin?
Hi, everybody.
Oh, and
So
Emma.
was
So many
Sam.
familiar
Emma was-
faces.
I was also there both times.
My God, that was nightmarish. I had a Safari browser open that had YouTube that just started playing live, so I was hearing everything double.
Oh, that's okay.
It was awful. It was like
Yeah,
an
I
awful
see your message
last 2
now.
minutes.
And
Yeah.
the infamous Mr. Mouse. I am blown away by the,
What an
the
honor.
depth of those memes on your Twitter, Mr. Mouse. Thank you for joining
Some
us.
deep cuts.
Yeah, and just for everyone to give a heads up about today. So we've spent some time this past week going over just everything that unfolded around the Wonderland conference, and we've queued up some clips of various things. So we have like a program for this evening, but we're also here to chat with all of you and see what you all think about everything that's going on.
You know what was amazing about this whole last week is like we weren't focused on Wonderland. Like we didn't do any of this. We knew it was going on, but we're like barely, I really mean barely talking about it. There might have been a link shared or a screenshot shared or something like that.
I think I looked over the talks at one point, but like months ago.
Pretty strange, and the whole sequence of events like went from strange to really strange, and we're still there in the land of very, very weird stuff. Not surprising for psychedelia, but what do you know?
So I feel like we should probably give like a basic introduction to like who we are. It's just that I know most of you are here because you know, but maybe some like basic housekeeping stuff. Thank you, Mr. Mouse. So we are all affiliated with Psymposia. We became affiliated with each other because we were all concerned about different sketchy currents that we were noticing in the psychedelics field, around things like abuse that's normalized or, capital encroachment into the field and attempts to monopolize and patent various aspects of what's going on. So we kind of saw each other like at first from a distance, like chiming in on the same controversies with the same perspective. And we realized that there were a lot of people that didn't share our basic assumptions about the world as like capitalism is bad and abuse is bad. And so we decided rather than trying to constantly argue with people that don't agree with those basic assumptions, we could try to put our heads together and think more strategically about how we organize and move forward with people who do care about certain fundamental things. And also we realized that we had a certain kind of privilege from having run into each other at conferences or at Rainbow, in the case of Dave and me. But
Yep.
that there were probably other people out there that were also sketched out by things like psychedelic capitalism, who just hadn't run into us or people like us at conferences. So we wanted to make it a little easier to, as we say, find the others and kind of, start to connect with people who have those basic shared assumptions.
I was gonna say
Yeah,
something sarcastic there, but I'm gonna keep it for that clip.
Yeah, it's been a long, strange trip, to be sure.
Sarcastic there, but I'm gonna.
Oh, somebody just signed into YouTube, huh?
Had to be
All right.
Pace. I blame all technical issues on Pace.
Should we just get into it? Do we want to, what is it? We're like 15 minutes in to the start time. That should be enough trickling for...
I think that's good trickling. All right.
So we're going to open up...
I feel like we
is,
should give some like basic background on just what happened, because not everyone here is going to have been following everything that's been going on. Does someone want to just like very basically describe what happened?
Yeah, sure. Go for it, Normie.
From my perspective, I woke up on, I think, that Thursday morning, and literally the first thing that I saw was a text that someone sent me of the picture of the band sheet. And then we were texting with one another. And I mean, my first reaction was like, I laughed. I'm like, what the fuck is this? Oh boy. Like, here we go.
Yeah.
And then we were like chatting.
Bewildered amusement for sure.
Well,
Yeah,
and actually the first thing I was aware of, I think, was Sasha getting kicked out of the conference and not being explained why. And then the band sheet came out. And we sort of
that's true.
distributed that.
I saw that
amongst one
first as
another.
well.
Yeah, Pace had shared Mouse's tweet and said like cat's out of the bag. I think with no pun. And yeah, then it was just like trying to,
no offense, Mr. Mouse,
gather facts and everything. But yeah, I mean, where do we want to go from there? We were banned. Our advisors were banned. Conscious Fund.
Bushy-haired stranger said the police were involved, ? I believe Sasha can fill in the chat if needed, but I believe that they were escorted out by the security and cops at the event, and told that they entered under false pretenses for checking in under, I believe, their dead name, with a ticket that they were gifted by a speaker from the previous year's conference.
Right. So things were already coming out like on Twitter that something was, rotten in Miami. And, we had this, it was very like quick succession in the sense that I think all things sort of unfolded within the span of less than an hour. It was interesting to have two independent, verifications that this had happened, as well as, Sasha's removal from the premises. It certainly lent weight that this was not just a made up thing. And after that, we started paying attention to something that we had no interest in beforehand. I mean, it just wasn't very much on our radar.
Yeah, and so
I want to say that sort of shocked amusement, sort of soured pretty quick as it became apparent what was actually going on.
Yeah, and then the next day, I believe it was the next day on, I don't know, the Friday, Saturday. I think it was the Friday, maybe. Then that's when we started hearing from people that that there was rumors going around that we were physically threatening Rick Doblin, which was just ridiculous. And anyone who was following that just knew how silly that was. And so we reached out to Rick. Russ reached out to Rick, and then Rick obviously knew that wasn't true and gave us a statement. Russ, I don't know if you have that statement on hand. and you want to read that? Because that
Let
was
me
at the
see here.
it was already look, it was already fucked up that like they just blanket banned a bunch of people, but the fact that there was then rumors going around that we were threatening violence on of all people Rick,
Yeah.
which is just like fucking comical. We took it super
So-
seriously though.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rick texted me and said that he heard the rumor, so he was personally made aware of the rumor yesterday morning after the ban was in place, but was and am not concerned about physical violence. I know that none of you would want to hurt me physically. Thanks for reaching out to reassure me, but know that no assurance was needed. Disagreement can be healthy. I did feel some of the criticisms were unfair, but that's in words and never made me think I was in physical danger.
Yeah, and Brian Pace and I were just a few months ago at a conference with Rick Doblin a few tables away, and there was
In Toronto.
there was no concern there. So
This was research to reality in Toronto. This was May. You know, it's. I mean,
to be
frankly, it's
fair-
outrageous that these kinds of rumors are circulating. I wanna
The
be
other
clear.
kind of a funny thing that Rick attached with his statement was that he is hoping that we can all make it to Psychedelic Science 2023, which is just kind of funny after being told that we were we were potentially threatening him with physical danger. He's like,
and part of the irony of this coming out when it did around Wonderland was
Also
that,
worth
sorry, Dave, were you talking?
No, you go ahead. Sorry. Connections like
Yeah, so part of the irony for me was that I had specifically not gone to Wonderland and instead had gone to an ethics conference because I'd had a lot of experiences of trying to get people at psychedelics conferences to care about some of the things that I found deeply concerning. And not all conferences, but many conferences, there were a lot of people who are very in favor of aligning, psychedelic research with far right-wing, fascist adjacent individuals and things like that. And so I was like, you know what, I need to start going outside of the psychedelic community and specifically raising these concerns with people who might actually care about them. And so it's like I had specifically not gone because I kind of lost the hope and to an extent. I mean, not fully, but at that sort of conference, I didn't expect to take the things that I care about seriously.
So for me, for whatever it's worth, this isn't the first time that I've been accused of plotting to engage in physical violence at an event. Back in 2018 at the CIIS conference, Cultural and Political Perspective in Psychedelics that Chacruna was putting on. I had brought a banner that some people were planning on putting up, and I was contacted by somebody the morning of the conference, I think, and was told that if I did something like that, I would get thrown out, that there were rumors going around I was planning on engagements against people at the event, which I don't know, it's kind of wild. It's just like, where does this come from? And the responses I've gotten from people at certain points are things along the lines of, oh, you seem so angry. It's just the logical conclusion, which I don't know, seems kind of silly to me. So yeah, with that, maybe we can get into Joey. Sorry.
Yeah, so Joey because Joey is a professor of chemistry right at Florida FIU
International University.
And so we are in a psychedelic educators network. Brian Pace and I, with Joey and other people are teaching on psychedelic studies at universities, accredited universities. And so Joey I saw a message saying that he was going to be speaking on a panel and had some plans to allude to or mention the ban list, before his panel. And so we have a video of that that we're going to play.
I wanted to just say I'm a member.
Sorry, it automatically plays. Don't know why. Here we go. So we'll just play this in full and then talk about it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Lastly, I wanted to just say I'm a member of the Psychedelic Educators Network, which is made up of university professors building programs on psychedelics at large institutions like Stanford, Yale, Ohio State, Maastricht, the Netherlands, and more. We have a shared mission of training students to work as psychedelic therapists, researchers, and other roles. Yesterday on Twitter, a post was circulated with a refusal of entry for Wonderland for a few people, and two of those people are professors in the Psychedelic Educators Network. I just want to say that excluding academics or journalists due to their criticisms and because their philosophies are not in alignment with our own, or for whatever reasons, is not the responsible way forward in the psychedelic space. We need to be welcoming. We need to be welcoming to all voices in these conversations, especially when those voices raise concerns about greed, sexual misconduct, and other bad practices not reported in popular media.
So thanks, Dr. Lichter, for doing us a solid. Thanks, Joey. We really appreciate it. And it should be noted that that was literally the only mention of the events that were absolutely dominating the hashtag Wonderland Miami official conference tag on Twitter. And only because a moderator who knew us personally, knew how we conduct ourselves, had the courage to stand up and call out what he thought was a totally screwed up situation and call it for what it was. Very professional, class act.
Am I mistaken in thinking he was recently just on stage with Nishay, right, at Psychedemia, and no physical violence occurred?
Who?
Was Dr. Lichter on the panel at Psychedemia?
No, actually,
sorry.
Dr. Lichter had another. He had another engagement, but
Got
both. Yeah, I've been in contact with Joey. He's a solid dude, but no, it's actually let's talk briefly about Psychedemia and the Psychedelic Research Institution, the Assembly of Psychedelic Research Institutions that Dr. Deveneaux moderated. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Nishay?
Yeah, so we just invited, because Psychedemia, the conference in August, was hosted by the new center at OSU, the Center for Psychedelic Drug Research and Education. And as that center was in the process of forming, we saw that there were also a lot of other psychedelic, research centers popping up all over the country and around the world. And so we decided it would be a great opportunity to, invite representatives from the different centers to come together and kind of share what they're working on and talk about how we might all collaborate. And there's also, out of that has been spun out a formal consortium of different centers that are working together. So we're involved in education, we're involved in this kind of field organization behind the scenes of our actual, of our published work. So to be portrayed as some kind of dangerous force in the psychedelic community is definitely at odds with everything that we do.
Yeah, and I have to point this out so often to people who might have just become interested recently. Like, going back, Psymposia, I worked with MAPS on their events. At Psychedelic Science 2017, Psymposia was a primary partner along with Dr. Bronner's in a group at the time called Fundamental. Like, I've worked with Rick. I've got Rick on to Joe Rogan before. Like, I was in contact with Rogan and got Rick on. I've hung out at Rick's house with him. Back in 2018, as Compass was coming onto the scene, and like simultaneously, MAPS had accepted money from Rebecca Mercer. That was the real, like, for me, the fundamental philosophical shift that happened at that point. And so in the last 4 years, Psymposia has had very different orientation towards things as opposed to the first like half of our existence. We've been around for like 8 years now. So there's just this bullshit that's out there that like Psymposia is just completely against MAPS, blah, blah, blah. It's like kind of important framing, I think.
Yeah,
Trans
worth pointing out.
Christian just asked who MAPS is. For those of you who are unaware, it's the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Study. They're the group that is going to be, putting PTSD, MDMA therapy through. They're currently going through clinical trials at the FDA. Just to clarify.
Yeah. So, do we want to jump into the next?
Well,
yeah, let's get into the next part. I think there were some takes that were out there that after this ban thing came up, people were commenting. Some other media groups were commenting, and I think it's worth looking at what people were saying.
So there's so much stuff blowing up on Twitter, right? So nothing. So the Psymposia crowd largely, and Sasha Cisco and one of our advisors and a few others, I think a FIU professor was banned. Yeah. So
Do you want to pause it there?
Interesting list.
Yeah.
So he got that
That's
wrong,
not
right?
Yeah, he's referring.
I mean, it'd
to,
be real
Joey,
difficult.
right?
Be real difficult to call out banning if you yourself are banned.
Yeah. He's talking about Joey Lichter there.
Yeah. That
Don't totally understand why everybody was banned. Like, I understand why Psymposia was banned. They've not been trying to really cultivate friendships, and Sasha similarly, but
Which is completely false.
It's interesting. I don't.
But
think
also,
we'll
I
be
didn't
doing
realize
that,
not
but
cultivating friendships is bannable.
people better have some reasonable behavior while you're at our conference, right? So, it's a tough thing. They ensued a whole Twitter storm, and that's all people were talking about for a few days there at Microdose, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that how do we feel about people being banned from conferences, and especially, I guess, journalists trying to cover stuff, and obviously they're sometimes they take a different approach to things, and I'm guessing that's probably why they were banned. Or I think I saw some stuff on Twitter around threats, but somebody posted a text that they had with I think it was Rick Doblin saying I didn't feel harmed or any sort of violence, but I mean, it just brings up an interesting point around, I guess, cancel culture, or just blocking people from entering to cover specific things because their viewpoints.
Yeah, and we could go in is it actually journalism what they do? Maybe. I think it's more like an op-ed mostly, but it's a whole debate, right? And I'm sure there were journalists there. I saw a lot of cameras there, but yeah, these folks have made their name in trying to call out greed, but I think they made a name in muddying the waters a little bit more than calling out greed, right? We have to figure out a way to see clearly around all this stuff, and the whole Compass couch thing. There's so much nuance there, and
I don't know what's going on.
And
here
we
at this
talked
point.
about it.
This is going off the rails. This is just stream of consciousness. I'll continue, but
trademarks and copyrights and all this stuff are part of the fabric of our reality. And is it better for some of us to do it, or is it better for J&J to do it? Right. I think it's better for us in the psychedelic scene to do it first, or come up with some sort of Creative Commons thing,
need to
some
be
sort
the
of
next
nonprofit that
J&J.
can just be for the commons and hold patents and copyrights and trademarks for us all to use and protect. But I've not seen anybody make moves there yet. So these things are just floating out there, ripe for the picking, right? Yeah, and people need to start figuring out how to be polite to one another. It's trust was broken when blackmail has happened in the past, and
Okay,
people
can
have
we
just
pause
been
it there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
I
a
just wanna
pretty
po-
big allegation.
I just wanna point out that
Let's go on.
yeah. I know we're not just real brief. Like Joe is insinuating that we have engaged in blackmail, and I have no clue what he's referencing. I'm curious if he is alluding to a point at which he was contacted because Psychedelics Today had a podcast with Rick Doblin in which Rick Doblin exposed confidential, privileged medical information from a trial participant on their podcast, and they ran it. And then they were contacted and asked to take that down because they should not be disseminating confidential trial participant medical records to their audience or in public more generally. I don't know how that would qualify as blackmail, but that's certainly that was the only thing that could come to mind as far as what they may have been alluding to. And if they see that as blackmail, I'm floored at their perception of reality.
Yeah, and the part
Mildly
about
abused.
so the part about friends too, like Brian and I were just talking about, like we are networked with all of these different psychedelic research centers and get invited out to speak at different universities, and so it's like it's clearly that they're in this very specific echo chamber wherein they don't like us and they're kind of extrapolating from that. But a lot of people unfortunately are in that echo chamber.
Yeah, and the fact
Yeah,
that
we're
he
doing our
questions
best
whether
to make friends, and
yeah, and the fact that he questions whether we do journalism is just fucking silly.
Well, that
I'll tell you
and-
how silly it is. Or maybe Russ, can you tell us how silly that is?
No, please. Would love to hear what you have to say.
Well, it's particularly silly when you question whether or not an outfit does journalism, and then your co-host's reply references a text message sent by Rick Doblin that was only readable by your co-host because Psymposia reported it. No one else reported that Rick Doblin had confirmed that he heard the rumor and that he didn't think it was true. What a silly thing.
It's just like funny because like I don't know if Joe realizes that like the journalists are also coming to us. You know? Like they're coming to us. Biggest outlets in the world. Like they contact us. It's just fucking silly. It shows you. Nishay, you put out a tweet, I think, about the echo chamber or the corporadelic kind of echo chamber. I think you hit the nail on the head with that.
Because the fact is, our work is widely respected, outside of these groups. And so when they say that it makes sense that we weren't invited because we're mean and no one likes us, like that just doesn't track with other people.
Well, it's funny to hear them like kind of touting that the need to be polite, and then knowing that we ended up on a secret banned list from a whole conference. Like, was that super polite? I don't know. I'm just a little hung up on that.
Like, and it's not the reporter's job to be polite, Like, that's not the job. If you're going to be polite, you're going to end up, like, not getting certain stories. You're not going to be
if you want
antagonistic towards
access
certain
journalism,
people. If you want access journalism, Forbes-style journalism, Bloomberg-style journalism, yeah, you want to be an industry, known industry person. You want to get invited to the right psychedelic parties, sure.
Yeah, but clearly, like Russ texted Rick Doblin. What did Rick Doblin do? He answered. We have put out very principled, hard-hitting work across multiple, platforms, whether it's scholarly research, which we'll get into later, media at the national level, and right here on YouTube. We are engaging.
Yeah, we've also, broken stories and released information and verifiable documentation that has, looking at the abuse that took place in the MAPS clinical trials, like, we provided documentation and information that had never seen the light before that showed that some of the statements that MAPS had made about what went down were patently untrue. Like, yeah, if that's not journalism, I really don't know what to say. And it seems to me, one of the things Joe said in the wake of that was that our reporting, I don't think he called it reporting, but, referring obliquely to Francoise Borzat's and the Center of Consciousness Medicine's training program, that our reporting had basically made those certificates that people had gotten from that training program worthless. And wasn't it such a shame that people had spent all this money and now they had these worthless certificates and they couldn't even tell people that they had trained with, Francoise and Aharon, because what would that do to their reputation, or who would take it seriously or anything? And so, to my mind, that shows a real affinity towards propping up abusive practitioners and industry players in service to what? Like maintaining some sort of social hierarchy, irrespective of the abuse that it's facilitating. Like the positions are dangerous, like actually dangerous, when you see what sort of behavior they insulate. So.
And weren't you tweeting just recently about the fact that they had been both talking to people who had been harmed by the Center for Consciousness Medicine group and simultaneously advertising events with Francoise Borzat?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They
Is it-
absolutely. Yep.
It's pretty clear to me that like part of their what they claim is this universal dislike of Psymposia is actually directly tied to being called out for aligning with abusers in that way when they have the information about what's going on. Because it's like, I could, if that's really what your MO is, I could see people being, not liking that. But that's kind of on you and not on us.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, first of all, I just want to say hello to Sasha Sisko, who's up in the chat. Looking forward to interacting more with Sasha. Thanks for all that you've been doing lately. I did want to clarify that James Kent's reporting, including the reporting on the Doblin confirmation of the rumor, was based on the reporting that we put out that Russ confirmed from Rick Doblin. The Twitter thread preceded James Kent's reporting.
Mm-hmm.
But also, hey.
All right, I'm going to continue this here.
Yeah.
Right, on the internet. Like, yes, sexual predators need to be called out and they need to be addressed in an appropriate way. But, is that the role of psychedelic media? Like, is that what you want to be known for? Or do you want to build? Like, there's an option here, tear down or build.
Do we want to
but it lasts a lot longer.
Yeah, I feel like that.
And I think I said,
do we
want to
be known for calling out sexual abuse and greed or not? I don't.
I'm
You
good
wanna
with
build-
that.
You could have
I'm
a
good with
training
that.
program. You could do
This
like
is just
psychedelics
like-
today and
This is
offer
like
practitioner
Silicon
training.
Valley tech bro platitudes nonsense.
To
me.
anybody who's wondering about our thoughts on whether or not we want to build or whether we want to do what we've been doing for years now, take a look at our episode on the thought leader and the critic, where we talk about those two roles.
It's just crazy to we're building a lot of things here.
I just
maybe
wanna
not
highlight-
from his perspective.
Yeah.
This comment: if the building is made of sexual abusers, maybe let's tear down first. Yeah.
Wow,
Bad.
James, if I could high five you, I would.
I wonder
Here
if
we go.
Joe thinks
Boom.
that there are any things that are worth tearing down, like the Third Reich or slavery or some other things. Like, can we just build our way out of them?
And for anyone who's about to invoke
Yeah.
Godwin's law,
scheduling
in response
system.
to Normie's comments, I mean, with the current political landscape, it's a fair question.
All right, let's get into this next part because I love it.
Fridays maybe when we stopped, but when Rome was sacked in the around 800, 600, right around there maybe.
I can't.
AD. It took a very long time for.
Just want to put this into context that he's talking about Psymposia, what Psymposia is doing, and comparing that to the sack of the Roman Empire that was 400 years after it actually happened. Still don't know what's going on here. It's Looney Tunes.
We're Alaric. We
Quality of
destroyed
life.
the Eleusinian mysteries. We're barbarians at the gate.
Back to what it was in the 1700s, 1800s. So can we afford that?
Yeah, Psymposia is going to send us back to plague times.
There was some other
Rule of
particularly
the
bad
Medicis.
takes going around on Twitter, and I just have to say, it's pretty rad when your detractors make you seem especially badass. I mean, sacking Rome. I mean, all right, sure, sacking Rome. Yeah, let's do it.
Can we afford to tear everything down? A lot more people are going to get hurt if we do.
Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting to see how the field is evolving and how people are either working together or not working together. Like, what is what's everybody's agenda, what's everybody's goals. I feel like, you know, at the start everybody wanted psychedelics to be more accessible, and as like, you know, the corporatization of it and money's coming in to some degree, that does allow some scalability and accessibility, even though some of these therapies are going to be like so pricey, and you know, you get into like the patent warts around stuff. It's very nuanced, and it's like, how do we move forward? Like, what is the goal for everybody in this space? Is it to make psychedelics more accessible?
I just want to point out that like Kyle raises really good points that are valid and totally worth a conversation. He's trying to steer the ship from the sack of Rome, which I appreciate.
And what does that look like? And sometimes it is very nuanced, right? And I always come back to like Bucky. I'm sure you do too, Bucky Fuller, just around like, you know, building a new system, right, or tearing it down. I saw some really interesting things when, just with the whole like Burlington College thing, I was there. It was like, it felt like it was getting torn down to some degree, and no real plan. And then when it did collapse, everybody was like, "What just happened?" It was like, well, we didn't really think about maybe what was actually happening. It was just a lot of emotion of wanting to tear structure down and not really realizing the impact that, well, what happens when you do tear it down? Do you have a plan? Do you know where that's going to go? And then it's just left with nothing. So, you know, it's just really kind of examining like our own ideas, beliefs, philosophies around stuff. And yeah, what's the agenda here? Can we work together? Are we just getting more divided? Seems like just in politics in general, we're very divided. But...
Right. So, yeah, what does everybody want to do? We have a lot of parties at the table here, and I think we all have very different ideas on what we want to do, right? I heard a line yesterday: if any of this stuff becomes above ground, it's immediately not sacred for them. So the sacredness comes from it being illegal and underground, which is a really fascinating thing.
Yeah.
Like,
it feels special, right? If like not everybody's doing it, everybody's posting their like microdosing and trip reports on like TikTok and stuff, and just like you feel like you have something special to hold on to that not everybody knows about. It does feel more sacred. It does feel more special. And I'm wondering, you know, again, doing our own self-reflection and self-awareness, sometimes it does feel like that. And I know I've battled up against some of those feelings as things become, you know, more mainstream, and there's maybe voices out there that, you know, haven't maybe been engaged in it. They had like one ayahuasca experience and they have a huge platform talking about stuff. And, you know, there's a little bit of that, like, whoa, what's going on here? And it's like, having a little bit of that sacredness is nice. It's like, oh, there's like, you know, a container, there's maybe like a lineage to follow after. It feels like you have a different relationship with it. But what happens when it becomes more mainstream? But on the other side, it's like, isn't that what a lot of people wanted? You know, if everybody, like, not everybody, but, you know, just that general, you know, phrase like psychedelics can heal the world. Like, you know, there's a lot of optimism there. And it's like, if that was like a common goal for a lot of folks of like getting these medicines out there to folks. It's like, these are the feelings that we're going to have to deal with if you do feel like it's sacred and should remain underground. It's like, you know, then does that actually create like gatekeeping on who actually gets access and healing if it's not, you know, fully accessible? So, you know, it's interesting.
It's a big deal.
So
I mean, my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like
Let's all talk
the
at
sacred.
once.
Yeah, well, just real quick, the sacredness feels like subtweeting at me. You know, I gave a talk and some other stuff ages ago called Commodifying the Sacred, which was critiques of sort of the emergence of the whole corporadelic industry. But this whole, like, the notions of access, the notions of can't we all be on the same team? Like, there's a lot of red herrings and sort of false dichotomies there. And I think that, like, this idea that you know, it's sacred because it's illegal is very much not at all what was being discussed or what has been discussed. And I think these kinds of distortions are really kind of like all they've got as far as actually engaging with it. Actually, Russ had a really great article that he shared the other day discussing sort of the importance of like concepts of sacredness around pushing back against capitalism and the like. But
was this the Carnival-esque article?
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, that
We can
article
throw
is great.
that
It's in
into
the Baffler. It's called Who Still Needs the Carnivalesque, or Who Needs the Carnivalesque. It was shared to us by an author on our site, Travis Kitchens. It's a really good article.
I think what to me, the point that's being missed in that is it's less about sacredness or specialness. It's about like subversiveness, right? And I think in a legal commodified system, like there is a subversive element that is taken out of that when it's completely illegal, and the act of consuming something or growing something is actually putting your freedom on the line. Whether you're growing in your house or you're selling or whatever you're doing. Yeah, I think that's associated with like a subversive element. You know, I think that's missed there. I think there is an inherent subversiveness to doing something that actually has like material consequences for you if you're caught.
Yeah, but I think transitioning from that to the notion that the issue is access, right, in a medical context, and that like for medicalized ends, that's such a tangled, whatever you want to call it, ball of wax.
Sure.
To mix my metaphors, like I just think that I mean, you want to talk about access, like, we can talk about issues with rescheduling. We can talk about, criminalization and prohibition in the first place, rather than the idea that this needs to be put under some sort of system structure setup that would give, outfits like Psychedelics Today that are selling these wacky training programs the ability to just sort of set up another layer of commodification over the top of the thing. But,
And just before we move away from what they were talking about, I want to just emphasize that, like, to me, it really comes across as like they're the one, Joe in particular, is attached to, prioritizing his relationships to powerful people. And so for him, challenging powerful people seems like tearing everything down, when actually we are standing on the side of people who have been harmed by powerful people, and they are not currently welcome and safe and feel included in a lot of psychedelic spaces. And they regularly reach out to us and say, thank you for building spaces and discourses where we feel included, where we can be part of the conversation. But that's not who Joe fundamentally cares about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before we jump into kind of the next parts of the video, can I take a little detour into Microdose's response statement? Because I think that that podcast was released on the 11th. So then on the 12th, Microdose comes out with a statement, which, just to put a little narrative context here, when did our tweet come out? We put a tweet thread out on November 6th with all of this information, the whole timeline of events, Rick's response. Bunch of people were asking Microdose HQ to make a statement. And so on the 12th, they finally put out a statement. This is after we've heard the rumor that Rick feels, or that someone says that Rick says excuse me, let me backtrack. That speakers felt that someone was threatening physical violence against them, specifically Rick Doblin. We get confirmation that he never felt that way, never said that. So Microdose releases a statement with, they tweet it out and they say, we made a statement about the stuff people are talking about, basically. And then they add a second tweet on that thread that says, oh, and we've also got a lot of comments about we need vegan options at our next one. So we're on that. Just by the way, we're on the vegan options for next time. We also made this statement. And in their statement, they write, a few of our speakers expressed concern about unwanted contact that had been made and requested that we instill provisions for their physical safety at the event. Since online conduct, such as sustained unwanted contact, can escalate in unexpected ways in the real world, we felt it important to make the choice regarding this issue. This includes providing personal security and assessing a number of individuals and organizations who have contributed to these concerns. We made this decision to ensure the safety of the event was not compromised. So they're still running with this idea that someone felt physically threatened but can't provide any context or evidence, and the only rumor that has circulated we've disproven. So
they got shit all over their face that blew up, and I think the only thing that they can possibly do is to direct it at us, that we were the potentially violent people there. It's the only thing they can do.
Can we talk about the parallel here of calling the cops on Sasha when things were not as they liked them. And then when, their list that was sort of reading like their diary of the people that they disliked leaked to the internet, and it made them look bad. And then some other things compounded that happened. That well, the response is very much like I felt like my life was threatened. We're getting some major cop vibes here.
Mm-hmm. Big time.
All right. So do we want to transition to this next part, which is going to occupy the rest of
Yeah. Let's do
Yeah.
it.
screen share?
Pace,
So
do you want to just
Yep, I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure we got that statement in there.
Pace, do you want to quickly just
Love it.
introduce?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we were already paying attention to what was going on at Wonderland. We had, not planned on it, but we're sort of forced to do so because, when you're being, publicly banned from a very large and well-funded psychedelics conference, and you happen to be, in that field as commentators, journalists, scholars, harm reduction advocates, what have you, you can't remain silent. So we were very much paying attention to what was going on. And then it was it Sunday or was it Saturday? I'm forgetting right now. Hamilton Morris took to the stage using his keynote slot to talk about psychedelic chemistry, I think was the topic.
I think that's
but,
what it was supposed to be.
Yeah. But really within less than 5 minutes, it's pretty good for a well-organized talk. We got to the real meat of what it was that Hamilton was there to do. And Hamilton laid the foundation first by attacking the journalism of Shayla Love, who, the two of them actually share a former employer. Both of them are formerly of Vice Media. And Shayla has done really great reporting, troubling psychedelic capitalism, has interviewed Dr. Deveneaux and myself on our work. And so he gestured at Shayla's work, talking about, how it was moralizing and hand-wringing and, blowing things out of proportion. And then shortly thereafter, transitions to specifically attacking right-wing psychedelia, a peer-reviewed paper that we've covered on this channel, if you're interested, that I co-wrote with Dr. Deveneaux. And, let's just say that the juxtaposition of a celebrity taking pot shots at two people that by then he absolutely must have been aware, as we have been informed. A lot of people were talking about this ban list, taking shots at people he knew were banned from this stage. So let's take a look at it. A reply is due.
And one little extra piece of context for all of you who weren't at Wonderland last year or following it. Shayla won Reporter of the Year from Wonderland last year, and I'm pretty sure Vice won Media Outlet of the Year from Wonderland this year. So just some context as we go into this.
Thanks. Yeah, totally.
all right. Here we go.
Past, I was working primarily as a documentarian and journalist, doing chemistry in the background. Now I'm working as a chemist, doing journalism in the background, and I'm constantly frustrated by the way that these things are being presented in the media, because I think that we're at a very precarious and vulnerable time, and I want to ensure that the progress and the momentum that we're currently seeing is maintained into the future. I think probably most people here are familiar with the famous Terence McKenna rallying cry, "Find the others," something that he was paraphrasing from Timothy Leary in the 1960s. And the idea is find affinity groups, find people that share your passion and come together to promote understanding, to promote research, to learn about ourselves, to learn about each other. And that is what the psychedelic community is supposed to be. I first met Jason Wallach the chemists that I've worked with for all these years at a conference just like this. And I think that the conferences that Rick arranged were instrumental for building that community, bringing people together, which helped not only MAPS and Rick's personal endeavors, but it helped everyone. So I've been a little bit troubled in recent years because it feels like the McKenna rallying cry has been modified to something maybe a little closer to find the others and accuse them of commodifying the sacred to assert your moral superiority.
Can we pause it?
Something
Pause
like
there.
that. I don't know. And
So first of all, that gets back to, like subtweeting at Dave with the commodifying the sacred.
Nobody will name me.
Very careful to avoid invoking the demon.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing about this framing is that I was there in those early days with him and Jason Wallach. I didn't meet them. They met a little bit earlier than me, maybe the year or two before I met Jason, but it was at a Horizons conference in 2010. And at the end of the conference, I went up for the all speaker panel, and I mentioned that I had just started a new psychedelic society in Philadelphia, which in 2010 there weren't a lot around yet. It wasn't really a thing at that time. And so I said, does anyone have any reading suggestions for, books that we could read for this group? And afterwards, Jason came up to me and he said, "Oh, you're in Philadelphia. I'm actually in Philadelphia too." And so we actually became quite good friends, and we would, see each other in Philadelphia and things along those lines. So, and he mentions like, "Oh, there was this good old time, and it should be like that now." It's important to emphasize that like back in the beginning, all of us were, we describe ourselves sometimes as reformed cheerleaders. Like we were very gung-ho about psychedelics and the psychedelic kind of field. And, I still really believe in the power of psychedelics. And obviously I think they're fascinating. I wouldn't have stuck around if I didn't. But I started to see enough things that concerned me, and people not caring about things like rape and other, horrible behaviors, that I started realizing, and as we've talked a lot about on our podcast before, that we're not actually all on the same team. And actually there are people who are working to counter ends, like the ends that their goals that some of us are working towards are explicitly in contradiction to those that other people are working towards. And so we're more interested in keeping psychedelics for the people and not for powerful corporations or the further stratification of society with growing inequality and contributing to the rise of fascism, and psychedelics as a tool for fascist indoctrination. But there are other people who view things differently. So it's important to kind of put an asterisk next to what he's saying. And there is a reason why there became these rifts within the psychedelic community, even among the people who were there in the beginning.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that both Hamilton and Jason actually spoke at our first event back in 2014. I worked with Hamilton again in 2016 in Brooklyn. And the other thing is, like, Rick Doblin didn't invent the psychedelic conference. There's been psychedelic conferences before. Like, it's not just MAPS who did this, which is something that, is being... It's just like MAPS is the only group that's ever existed in this space. There's the Palenque conferences, there's the Mind States conferences, there's Psychedemia in 2012 before Psychedelic Science 2013. Like, these things have been going on for years.
Yeah, but that's not the only revisionism Hamilton engages in. So there will be plenty more.
Oh my goodness.
And, that's fine. I think that a lot of this comes from the fact that many of us have a sort of activist background, whether we like it or not. It was forced upon us. If you care so much about something that is in the most restrictive legal classification that the government has, you're forced to become an activist. You have to campaign for this because you don't have a choice. And that activist energy that was foundational to so much of the progress in the psychedelic community is getting a little twisted and weird as we approach something closer to the finish line, and it worries me. I'll give you an example.
Yeah, to me, it's like, when I was watching this before, it's why is it the critiques, they worry him as we approach the finish line? It's like kind of we should be worrying about these things as the finish
Totally.
line means like FDA approval, scaling, acceptance. Like this is the time that we should be highlighting these various things. And are we supposed to shut up as these systems and models are only going to scale?
Well, the other thing is, I think Hamilton's got a pretty wacky political analysis here, right? Where he's claiming that of course there was activist energy. You're dealing with some of the most restrictive legal categories or whatever, referring to, Controlled Substances Act and whatnot. But as I pointed out at the Psymposia conference in 2015, rather than people running around saying, I'm not a criminal, I just use drugs, that's a harmless crime, I shouldn't be, I'm not like those criminals, you should recognize that criminal is actually a socio-political distinction that has real consequences, and then start asking, well, if I feel that it's unjust for me to be treated in this way as a result of the drugs that I use, what does this mean about other criminalized subgroups? What does this mean? Like, what sort of affinity might exist between criminalized subgroups? And at the point back in 2015, I was talking about carceral issues and questions about expanding immigration detention centers and incarcerating migrant populations as drug prohibition changed, and the questions about for-profit prisons and things of that nature. And so I think Hamilton's view on this is rather reductive. And the presumption that, in his mind, the category activist is somehow, whether or not you like the label, that somehow that is a monolith, or somehow you could unite, everybody's sort of ends and means under that banner. It's sort of absurd. Like it's very easily problematized. And I don't think he spent much time thinking about that.
All right, let's continue this.
Example of this that I think is a really kind of encapsulates this issue. I was recently speaking at a festival with Timothy Tyler, and for those of you that don't know who that is, he is really the quintessential drug war horror story. This is somebody who was selling LSD when he was 25 years old. He was arrested and sentenced to life in prison under a draconian 3 strikes law. And he spent 25 years in prison. He was sentenced to life without parole. And the only reason that he even got out of prison is because Barack Obama issued a presidential pardon. So this is someone who, without the president directly interfering or intervening to grant him freedom, would have died in a cage.
I just want to point out a couple things here. Is Psymposia was one of the first outlets that covered the story in full. One of our old writers, Alexander Lechtman, covered this. He interviewed Timothy at length. It's a great interview. If you honestly just Google Timothy Tyler, whatever Psymposia, you can find that. And the other thing is that Obama did not pardon Tyler. He granted him clemency and commuted his sentence. There's a fundamental difference there from what a pardon is. My understanding is he still has a record and everything. So there is a difference there. And Timothy Tyler has supported Psymposia in the past too. So.
And we're speaking at this festival, and he said, I heard that you're working in a lab that receives funding from Compass Pathways. And I said, yeah, that's true. I do. I work in this lab that receives funding from Compass. And he said, well, how do you feel about that, man? And I said, oh, it's great. It's really cool. We're making all these new psychedelic drugs. It's really good. And he's like, well, I heard that they patented psilocybin. And I was like, yeah, that's true. They did. They patented one salt of one polymorph of psilocybin for one psychiatric indication. It's true, yeah. And he's like, well, how do you feel about that? And I said, I think it's a means to an end, which is getting this through FDA approval. And he said, but what about my friends that are selling psilocybin-containing mushrooms? They're not going to be able to do it anymore. No one will be able to sell mushrooms because they're going to have a monopoly. And then it dawned on me that he had a very distorted idea of what any of this means, how patents work. And this is not to point out to say, oh, Timothy Tyler doesn't understand patents. Most people don't, because this is a new thing. In the past, when you would come to these conferences, no one was talking about patents. In fact, the only person, and I am certain of this, the only person that ever talked about patents in the past was Paul Stamets, who would show, all the different patents that he'd collected for his various mycological inventions. But other than that, no one was talking about patents. So it's not surprising that people have a somewhat distorted idea of what patents are and the power that they have.
Yeah, so that's
All
just
right,
not
where
true.
do we begin?
Okay, so should we start with the fact that Compass was not just trying to patent one salt for one indication? Russell and I actually co-authored an article covering the fact that they were looking to patent any metabolites of Comp 360, which would include psilocin, and for numerous indications, for I think we said more indications than you could.
I mean, it was
count
essentially
or
like the
name.
Basically, they
DSM.
copy and pasted like the DSM. Yeah.
Then the patent thing is just, again, wacky. Like, I mean, I was having a conversation in 2013 at the MAPS conference with Andrew Sewell about a month before he passed away tragically. Dealing with issues with John Halpern and patents and cluster headaches and hell, I mean, you can look at things with Howard Lotsoff and Ibogaine, Iboga. I mean, this is but Hamilton is certain that that this has never been covered before.
There's stuff about Doblin in the early 90s developing anti-patent strategies for MDMA. It's not Stamets is not the first instance. It's just historically inaccurate. All right, we want to continue?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
The prevalent idea that many people seem to have is that a patent is like some kind of wizardly intervention that will cause like a global extinction of all psilocybin-containing mushrooms, and only one evil oligarch will be able to grant psilocybin to people. This is like absolutely not the case.
Let's just play this Anger Manor clip.
Yeah.
Sure.
Burning Man and gonna collect psychedelics. Yeah, I'm not gonna stop people going to shamans.
What I find
right.
so like frustrating about this is he's kind of like exaggerating to make it seem like dumb that anyone would ever enforce a patent, but that's the whole reason you file a patent. So you
Well,
can,
and
like,
frankly,
have an exclusivity.
George Goldsmith from Compass has been explicit that when he was asked by Vice reporters, like, no, we wouldn't sign on to something that says we wouldn't enforce our patents. Like, why the hell do you think we got the patents in the first place? Like, why are you going to spend the cash and go through the legal system to secure a patent just to not enforce it if you're a corporation like that?
Exactly. And they spent a lot of cash and they got quite a lot of patents. But right here in the comments, we've got none other than Dr. Joey saying, if the public has a distorted view on patents, wouldn't we benefit from journalists providing reports on them? I can't help to agree with you, good doctor.
So I want to plug one of the band folks was our advisor, who's an awesome journalist, writer, Alex Zajcik. He was banned for what reason? No clue. And he recently came out with a book on patents. If anyone is interested in like kind of the making sense of patents, his book Owning the Sun, People's History of Monopoly Medicine from aspirin to COVID-19 is an excellent place to start. And
it's phenomenal.
He talks about all this stuff. He rips apart like what Hamilton's just talking about with wizardry and everything like that. Yeah, it kind of is. That's what patents are. They're like magic spells essentially. And the introduction of his book lays that out. I pasted a thing
tracing
here
it back
that
to
I was gonna
alchemy,
read.
like literally.
Yeah, he traces it back to
Like,
alchemy.
actually.
It's amazing.
It's really
It's
good.
really
We're
amazing.
actually going to do a real deep dive with him when the paperback comes out. So stay tuned.
Totally looking forward to it. It's a really excellent history. While we're talking about other folks who can't join us, and again, we'll spend some time with Sasha a little bit later, but also on that list from the Psymposia team was Yarlix Estrada. And Yarlix is a harm reduction prevention specialist for the Department of New York City, Department of Health, Mental Hygiene, and absolutely outspoken, radical, pioneering, or rather, like visionary, rather, person contributing to this field. Was part of a team that put together one of the first 2 clean injection sites in the United States, and does drug checking as well on site. And she couldn't be with us tonight because they're screening actually a documentary on these on their work and things around those kinds of activities. But I do have a text message from Yarlix that says, in my opinion, it's no surprise that a corporate conference that is not from the community or has interest in increasing accessibility to psychedelic conferences or substances in varying capacities would ban those who are. It's also disappointing to see that those that attended or are somehow affiliated and have not said anything about what's going on. The silence sounds like a continued alliance with microdose. She continues, I'm mostly concerned with supporting my community through their journeys with psychedelics and all psychoactive substances, especially those that have no resources and aren't cozying up to venture capitalists. As far as I'm concerned, we're not in the same community space and obviously do not have the same values or end goals. Indeed, and this is why this person advises Psymposia.
I wanna just read a couple things here on patents. One of the Hamilton mentioned it, and like the evil oligarch is gonna come and crawl through your window basically and steal your mushrooms. This kind of straw man argument has been going around for at least 4 years now that I'm aware of. Back in 2018, it was November of 2018. Throughout 2018 was like a lot of the Compass kind of coming into the space, and the community sort of being aware of them. One of the early things was Peter Thiel's involvement. He was one of the first investors in Compass through one of his Lord of the Rings companies. And Doblin did an interview with Psychedelic Times, and to kind of push back on this. We were coming out for Compass at that time, and there was kind of chatter in the community. But Doblin said this, and I want to contrast this with a more recent example. He said, for example, Peter Thiel invested in Compass. He was an early investor, but he's not controlling things. I've seen articles claiming Peter Thiel controls the flow of psilocybin. Rick laughs. He's this evil guy doing all these things with Trump. It's guilt by association, which is not fair. No one was claiming that Peter Thiel was controlling the flow of psilocybin. That was something that was made up in Rick's head. It didn't happen.
It was great. If you Googled it at that time, the only hit that you got for it was that one interview with Rick. Whereas now that aspect of it has been covered elsewhere. So when you Google it, you get coverage of the fact that Rick made that up for that interview.
So I want to contrast. I don't know when this was said. It was somewhat recent. I did a search for it a little while ago. It might have been last year. I think it might have been last year. So Doblin said, attempts to patent therapeutic methods invented by others are doomed to fail, reputationally terrible, and capitalism gone rogue, Doblin said. To the extent that Atai and Compass seek to profit through patents on processes or therapeutic methods that they didn't invent, they will fail and will squander their potential to be a force for healing and profit. I just don't get how the contrast could be. It's ridiculous.
Well, and having raised some of these issues,
concerns were right there. We were
Yeah,
brought to
exactly.
you on a platter.
I mean, we it was the same after party from Horizons in 2018. Yeah, 'cause
19.
2019 was the podcast. No, 2019 was the podcast. 2018 was when we did the
Oh
we
yeah,
had
it
like
was.
the
That was nuts.
crazy house thing. And so yeah, so talking
Yeah,
both
you're
with
right.
Hamilton and Rick about the concerns on that, and both of them would go
Yeah.
on to parody it. And then of course, like looking at some of the ways, I mean, while we're talking about team members who are, Lily has pinged to point out that she's been getting kicked out of psychedelic events for raising issues since 2014, that after she tried to bring up issues of sexual abuse and misconduct older guides, she was no longer invited back. And that goes, you know, again, whether we're talking about Hamilton or Rick or folks at the Guild of Guides, like we are talking about some of the most visible, influential people in the space. And I think that bears highlighting.
All right,
Yeah,
let's
and
get
while
back
we're
to
on
things here.
the last couple people that were on that list, they were both involved with microdose, and one of them, Michael Hoyos, left to like keep his integrity, is my understanding. So they were both
folks on
kept
the
out of the
band list.
conference too.
Yeah, that's what
that
he
was
said
the Conscious
publicly.
Fund, right? Russ? Can you talk a little bit more about that context? Like, who's the Conscious Fund? Who's Michael Hoyos? Who's Reese?
Yeah, the
Capital?
Conscious Fund is a lot of the money that's behind Microdose HQ, basically. It's run by two people, I believe, out of Malta. And Michael Hoyos was one of the founding partners who left basically under the pretense that he didn't feel like his integrity would be kept intact remaining with the Conscious Fund. I think that's all I can really say there.
All right, I'm going to continue here.
This kind of concern has been reverberating throughout the media. There's a lot of discussion about hype and what if we're not adequately articulating the risks associated with psychedelic drug use and so on and so forth. Well, first of all, I mean, I grew up in the 90s. I was given many, many lifetimes worth of cautionary information about the dangers of drugs, so I'm not too worried about that. But sure, okay, fine, it's good.
Okay, yeah, that's where he stops.
Yeah, I just want to point out that the concerns that are being raised now around psychedelic therapy, the intricacies, the ethics of all of that, like that wasn't what was around in the 1990s with like fear-mongering hysteria with DARE. Like, it's such a poor argument.
What I really see are just enormous numbers of these sort of moralistic hand-wringing articles. Again, LSD capitalism promises a bad trip for us all. Okay, great. The psychedelic renaissance is on the verge of an uneasy enlightenment.
He just, like, I just read that piece today. It's a Jacobin piece. It's actually quite fantastic, and you know, it talks about like the dysfunctional mental health care system, social and economic causes of mental illness, and he just sweeps it away. No engagement with it, just this fucking shit-eating grin on his face. Oh,
laying it on thick.
You know, this has also permeated the peer-reviewed scientific and medical literature, the rapid rise in investment in psychedelics, cart before the horse.
Okay, so that was a journal of the American Medical Association. This is the conclusions of that piece. That piece was so horrifying. Here's the conclusion. Although popular excitement, policy momentum, and financial investment in psychedelics continue to increase, it is imperative that the research maintain scientific rigor and dispassion to outcomes in pursuit of improved therapeutics and new insights into the mind, brain, and consciousness that this class of molecules may well afford in the coming years. The presence of large-scale, newly established public companies as an unprecedented category of stakeholder may help to further understanding of these molecules and their possible clinical applications. But these firms also have a unique set of self-interests that must be understood and considered. Research enabled by these firms must still meet the same rigorous standards that are expected elsewhere, even if breakthrough status is warranted. There may be tension between avid advocates of this class of compounds and the deliberately slower pace of adoption encouraged by the scientific method. But rigorous research is necessary to more fully understand the risks and benefits involved in any presumptive clinical application. The first wave of psychedelic research was disrupted by conflict between cultural and political forces. The current wave of psychedelic research could be susceptible to an emerging conflict between entrepreneurial enthusiasm and scientific deliberation. I don't understand how that's controversial at all.
I mean, it's not just
No, it
cheerleading.
just fits tone and speech.
I mean, maybe I'm getting the sense that Hamilton's not encouraging people to read these particular articles that he's talking about. Just a thought.
It certainly seems that way.
Which is,
I
it's
think James
wild
Curtis
because
said
this is
something
such
in
a
the
short
chat
article.
along the lines of
I think that's an important point, actually, if someone could highlight it. Yeah, just the idea that he's leading with his tone because he's trying to convince the audience to feel that it's ridiculous, the ideas that he's talking about, without having to think too hard about it. So I think that that's a great description of it, and he continues as the talk goes on.
And it's particularly wild and I think worth noting because he goes on to basically say that journalists are responsible not only for the things they say, but the things they don't say, and that they're actually, he basically accuses Shayla and other people of sort of inviting their audience to draw wildly incorrect conclusions because their audiences won't actually read all of what they say. So they have this increased burden of responsibility. And then he does it to such a ridiculously absurd, almost caricatured degree throughout the talk that, like, it seems, sort of judging by his own professed metric, he's sort of the chief violator of this point.
All right, Pace and Shay, you guys ready? You ready, Pace?
Oh, maybe I should unmute. Yeah, I mean,
good thing I asked.
A celebrity is a celebrity. Let's hear what the celebrity has to say.
All right.
Patenting and cultural appropriation raise questions about who should profit from psychedelics, and on and on. The gentrification of consciousness, the rise of the psychedelic industrial complex. And we are, so I'm seeing a lot of this, like a lot of it. It seems to be the major way that this sort of stuff is being covered. But then, of course, the ever-present threat of right-wing people using psychedelics. What are we going to do? Right-wing people use the same drugs as left-wing people? I had no idea. And the basis for this insane article is a peer-reviewed scholarly article that is so absurd, I cannot even believe that people are not criticizing this. They actually make a claim in this sort of like Neo-Milgram experiment that was conducted in Singapore. I'm not making this up. Like, this is real. That they did an experiment where they gave people worms and asked them to feel grateful, and then hold the worms over a mock coffee grinder. And apparently the grateful people in this study were more likely to put the worms into the mock coffee grinder. Therefore, gratitude makes people more vulnerable to authoritarian thinking. This is already a very tenuous claim, I think. But they took it a step further to say that psychedelics cause gratitude, and as we know from the worm coffee grinder experiment, gratitude makes us vulnerable to authoritarian thinking. Therefore, psychedelics make us vulnerable to authoritarian thinking, and we all know that Jordan Peterson used a psychedelic, blah, 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 blah. So Peter Thiel, something. So we've all got to be really careful.
Peter Thiel, the funder of the person who he works for, or the company he works for.
Yeah. Also, just to point out what Emma Stamm said, right? Like that this talk was supposed to be about like the future of chemistry, and instead turns into like Grampy Hamilton rants about things he doesn't like.
Well, he also just completely eliminates the context that the paper was written in too, like before even getting into the experiment stuff.
Yeah. Well, so actually maybe, because I want to get into the worms, but maybe Brian, you could talk about the reason that we wrote the piece in the first place.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's an absolute, categorical distortion that Hamilton is making. He is taking actually, one of the conclusions of our piece is for granted. Right wing people take psychedelic drugs, is the same drugs that left wing people do. Oh no. Well, the reality is in about like 2017, 2018, the Trump era, there were news articles breathlessly talking about how psilocybin might stop fascism. And I regret to inform you all that the steady drip of articles and sentiments and think pieces, wondering aloud whether or not psychedelics can save the world, continues to this day. So, the reality is that we were not breathlessly reporting that psychedelics were being used by people we disagree with politically. That was not the point of right-wing psychedelia. The point of right-wing psychedelia was an intervention in a utopian discourse that was playing out with the aid of psychedelic researchers, with the aid of the media, and with the full cooperation of psychedelic advocates and others who stood to profit from psychedelic medicine being approved as quickly as possible, to make sure that we all had a very hopeful idea of how all this would go. Had Hamilton, while he was raking Shayla Love's excellent work over the coals, referred to even the title of the article she wrote where she interviewed Nishay and I. It's The False Promise of Psychedelic Utopia. A much better version of what it is that we were trying to say is psychedelics are not going to push anybody in any particular ideological direction. That it's ahistorical to claim such things.
And part of our interest, part of my interest with all of this is that those utopian narratives about what psychedelics are going to fix everything from climate change to political polarization to the rise of fascism, those narratives are being used actively by corporadelic leaders, people in the corporate medical space, to justify and unjustify the means logic behind what it is that they're doing. Because if you question their tactics, and I've seen this play out, they'll pull out, well, you don't care about the future of the planet because we need to get psychedelics into as many people as quickly as possible in order to avert all of these changes. And so if you're questioning me, you're jeopardizing all of that. And so we wanted to say, hold on, like not only does it matter how psychedelics are used, does it matter the context, including the material social realities of psychedelic use, it's not just going to go in a positive direction no matter what. The context really matters. The social security of people extremely matters to all of this. But also, if you look at the literature on inequality in society, it's actually inequality that's fueling those very things: climate change, political polarization, the rise of fascism. So on the one hand, it's this bait and switch, as I referred to it in the past. They're saying, don't question us, we're going to solve all these things, while structurally, materially, what they're doing by creating these new psychedelic unicorn companies is contributing to the very problems that they're saying, don't question us, we're fixing.
Yeah, it's also worth noting, like Michael Mithofer from MAPS explicitly said to Lily and I when we interviewed him talking about the numerous issues we had found with the MAPS clinical trials that, basically, 22 veterans kill themselves every day, so you guys must just not care about them. And, putting aside like the fact that the majority of veterans who kill themselves haven't seen deployment, and it raises real question both about what on in basic the condition of folks in society more broadly when they enlist. Like, if we take Mithofer's logic and actually, if we take it not as a cynical response, but as something he really believes in, you would think someone that's so concerned with the number of vets killing themselves wouldn't want them to be subjected to an understudied, psychological intervention that has real histories of like an ongoing present iterations of like abuse and horror stories, and like it's tied in, which Hamilton actually ends up touching on later, but completely whiffs on. So.
And then the worms. I want to get to the worms.
Yes, get to the worms. That also ties into what Megan said a moment ago. But
Please
sorry,
do.
please.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, I could be misreading this, but just the way he said a study in Singapore, it sounded like he was dismissing the study because it was out of Singapore, as if it couldn't be a valid study, which I contest. And also, it's worth pointing out that paper was published in the journal Emotion, which is widely cited, a legitimate journal, and is published by the American Psychological Association. So he's acting like it's just some, weird thing that I dragged off the internet, but it's actually, in a legitimate paper, a legitimate journal. And the way that we refer to it, we mentioned specifically. So in their study, this is from our paper, in their study, participants who were induced to feel gratitude were more likely to obey commands to grind worms in a grinder compared to those without gratitude priming. The authors note that, quote, gratitude could increase susceptibility to social influence, making the grateful person more likely to align with social conventions and directions. The grateful person is prone to keep in line with social forces, the consequences of which could sometimes be undesirable. And when I first posted a draft to our paper on Facebook, I got a comment by Sunil Kumar Agarwal, who was behind the legal push for end-of-life psychedelic access with psilocybin. So he's been in the news a lot recently. But he mentioned that it resonates with the work coming out of awe psychology studies, and he specifically cited a review in New York Academy of Sciences by Michelle N. Chioda. And I wanted to just quickly read a quote from that paper, because this is, again, support for our argument that's not just the worm paper. And then in this paper, she says, quote, what makes me nervous is the implicit assumption, especially in popular culture, that all effects of awe are good and that all problems can be fixed by awe. Several years ago, I began to receive a growing number of requests for interviews about awe. Nearly every journalist with whom I spoke wanted me to say that awe makes us better people. It probably does, sometimes, and maybe even most of the time. Awe is pleasant, and evidence thus far suggests that our capacity for awe is adaptive, that it is a useful response to certain circumstances. But awe is not good or bad per se, and has no inherent moral value. Our propensity for awe is used by cult leaders, dictators, conspiracy theory pushers, and religious extremists to secure devoted believers who go on to commit atrocities against themselves and others. Awe seems to produce a little earthquake in the mind, a moment of cognitive malleability, offering a chance to expand and reconstruct one's mental model of the world. The model that emerges depends on what happens in the moments during and after encountering the awe stimulus. We still know far too little about that phase of awe. So our argument is supported and backed up by other researchers in adjacent fields.
So I just want to point out, because in a very real way, Hamilton has not just, taken a big dump on the work of Shayla Love. He has not just tried to slap down the scholarly contributions of myself and Dr. Devono, who's been contributing for well over a decade to the psychedelic field. But in his sort of smirking treatment, he has also, attacked the work of these researchers. And I just want to say out loud that it's not just, the worm paper. It's not just about worms. This was in the Journal of Emotion. And the title is Gratitude Facilitates Obedience, New Evidence for the Social Alignment Perspective. And it was written by Eddie M.W. Tong et al. In 2020. For those of you who are interested in reading it, I posted the snapshot of the abstract on my pinned Twitter.
All right, shall we continue? Do you have anything else to say?
I
think there was also something, and I don't have the paper in front of me, but I do think somebody in chat raised the question if it was just gratitude and not other coached emotions. And my recollection is that there was a distinction made that it was specifically dealing with gratitude, and that they compared it with, was it like other things? It's in the paper. We can throw the paper in the chat and the show notes.
Sweet.
And this stuff just never ends. There was at the World Economic Forum, there was a psychedelic house organized by Maria Velkova. It was a really wonderful event, and it was almost a bait and switch, because everyone, myself included, went to this event thinking, all right, here it is. It's finally going to happen. We're going to see all this virtue signaling is going to be over. We're going to see people openly talking about money. They're going to talk about how much this therapy costs. They're going to be honest about it. These are all money men. They're business people. They're going to break it out. But it wasn't. It was just more of the same. Indigenous reciprocity, sexual abuse, all ultra progressive, ultra conscious, ecologically oriented, good stuff. And the journalists were disappointed. They almost pretended that it didn't happen. They just pretended that it was what they thought it was going to be, despite the fact that it was like as progressive as you could possibly imagine. And
It's like such a backhanded. Like, I don't know what he's.
I'm more imaginative than Hamilton thinks I am. I can imagine more progressive things than whatever the fuck is going on at Davos.
Yeah, that's where he lost me, is thinking that Davos was the most progressive conversations in psychedelia. Come on.
I mean, he's still like dismissive of any of these issues. Hasn't engaged in them.
then you end up with stuff like this in Bloomberg. What about a Coke bottle in a clinic, Hazan asked. He said the idea of putting products in front of people undergoing an experience needs to be discussed. Like product placement in people's trips. And I thought I had read too much Philip K. Dick, but this is
Stop
really...
it.
I just want to point
seriously,
out that
first of all,
I just want to point out that the person that he is talking about is Marie Kazan, who runs Tabula Rasa Ventures. He's venture capitalist in this space. This isn't a super progressive person, activist in this space at all, even though he's making
and I would also
look like that.
I would also just say he references, there's a lot of, it's kind of like the person who walks into the room and does something like really inconsiderate and announces to the room while they're doing it that they're an asshole, and that somehow excuses it. And this is the way in which he's invoking Philip K. Dick's predictions and ideas about drugs and the way they interact with the world. Like there are dystopias where drugs exist, and we may already be in one, and we may be building one.
Yeah, I don't understand his point about I've read so much Philip K. Dick, so none of it applies, or I'm not worried about anything he's ever written. Like, I don't know.
Right.
It's an odd take.
I mean, needs to be discussed, maybe. I can think of like several hundred things that need to be discussed before that, but maybe at some point if it could be discussed. I don't really need to discuss it. And then
also, just why is he so outright dismissive of this idea? Because it's like a legitimate question of like putting product placement in front of someone in a trip. That's like a potential in the future, and that's weird.
And seeing the stuff
they want to put it in the sky, for God's sakes. You think they're not going to put it in a trip when you're taking suggestibility drugs?
But also, that's
my
just
child.
Seeing what's already going on around like surveillance capitalism and psychedelics and the merging of wearables and apps and predictive analytics and what I'm spacing on what they call the, your digital phenotype and all that shit. Like, the notion that this is something not to worry about because he's read Philip K. Dick, so somehow it's relegated to the realm of sci-fi or something is just, again, kind of absurd.
Yeah, and some guy, Matt, just said, when's the last time you went to a doctor and saw no ads? That's a really good point. Like, lobbies of doctors' offices are full of product placement.
I mean, these like psychedelic mainstream evangelicals are all about advertising. Sessa, Rick, they love these little mock-up pharmaceutical ads that they're getting ready to create.
And the point that Teal lives for all that info too, like that's exactly, I'm right there with you. I've been, banging on about that since 2018, specifically tied to this. And yet, like, it gets caricatured or misrepresented, and here we are.
Of who has been presenting at this festival, who has probably been the single most prolific contributor to this discussion in terms of concerns about patenting of psychedelics, commercialization of psychedelics, corporatization of psychedelics, and on and on and on, publishing who knows how many of these blog entries for Vice, all of which are
Blog entries? Like, they're articles, they're not blogs. This isn't like some idiot posting on wherever. That's such a like an asshole move for him to say. He's trying to minimize her,
anti-compass.
This is the guy
and
who got
seem
his
to
start
be
doing
oriented-
Vice videos for.
This
on
is the guy who
YouTube.
literally wrote. Sorry, it's called
blogs,
an
you mean,
article,
Ross?
but this is a guy who wrote a blog post for Vice about penis envy and tried to fit as many dick jokes as he could in the thing. like.
Yeah, Emma, the Vice.
I'm not
blog.
sure that's how he
Yeah,
got his
ever heard of
start.
that?
I thought he got his start doing commercials for iPods.
Oh,
let's move
yes. Sorry, it was because he's Errol Morris's son, right? That
toward
was
the business
correct,
interests
yeah.
of Carrie Turnbull in a way that I find a little bit odd, but I don't know.
Okay, wait, hold on. He just
So bad.
insinuated that Shayla's reporting has been done in the interests of Carrie Turnbull. And while Vice, particularly in a documentary project that they put out, gave Carrie an unreasonable platform, and sort of tried to make him out to be sort of the white knight of psychedelia or something like that. To insinuate or blatantly suggest that Shayla is somehow on Carrie's payroll or is promoting articles that somehow like are being written in order to advance Carrie's interests at the expense of his own bosses or his own funders or his own company's, corporate interests. Like, again, I would love to see the evidence that he's got to support that allegation.
Yeah, he's getting up on a stage in front of all these people and just trashing her. With I haven't seen any shred of evidence here.
And also this sort of moralistic hand-wringing about, what about people making psychedelics? What if they patent them? Like, I just don't really understand why that is such a bad thing.
I think he's the only one, maybe.
But that's all fine. What worried me were there were 3 articles in particular.
He does this all the time. He does this throughout this talk. He trashes somebody, or he brings these points up, and then that's okay.
And I'm not trying to call her out or say that this is bad, because if you actually read them very carefully, she's not really making the claims exactly, but when you're a journalist, you don't even need to say something. If you just allude to it, people are barely reading stuff beyond the headline to begin with. So if you just gesture toward an idea, people will run with it.
Jeez,
Which
it
is
seems
kinda like
Hamilton's
what he was
done an
doing
awful
with-
lot of that.
I think we were all going for the same point there.
Irony is the word that we're looking for.
Idea, can a company patent the basic components of psychedelic therapy, was responsible for this meme that Compass had patented hand-holding, and that everyone talked about seriously. Again, they were saying, how can they patent hand-holding? It's like, they didn't patent hand-holding. Like, this is not real. It's described in a patent in the same way that patents expansively describe all kinds of things. But
You hear that word, expansively? Like, yes, they try to throw everything that they possibly can. Their lawyers want to get everything for past some ignorant patent examiner, and they get what they can.
that doesn't mean that
they
are
didn't
going to
patent that. They just wrote it into a patent application. Anyway,
arrest anyone that holds hands in the context of psychedelic therapy. They couldn't if they wanted to. It's just like a fake issue.
I mean, people don't get
What's also a
arrested
fake
for
issue is
patent.
people claiming that they were going to get arrested. Like, that's fake.
And also the fixation on the hand holding, like, Compass did try to patent Comp 360 or any metabolites, which would have included psilocin, for a wide range of indications. Like, yeah.
There is the psychedelics are $1 billion business and no one can agree who should control it. This was responsible for introducing the idea that Compass had interfered with legalization efforts in Oregon.
Nope.
All right, I'm going to play the whole clip, and this is one that I might have to rewind because it's so bad.
Which was really bothersome to me. And actually, in Shayla Love's defense, she never said that. She never explicitly said that in the article, if you read it very carefully. But that
I've read it so carefully that it's not in there. What actually happened? Let me get the dates here.
This is just like,
yeah,
the degree of like willful misrepresentation is and I don't know if it's just pure cynicism or if Hamilton is that like has that little faith in his audience's willingness or interest in reading. Like, it's
I can only speculate on this specific instance because it involves David Bronner and Dr. Bronner's. So I don't really know what's going on here. On March 13th of 2021, David Bronner put out a blog post, which is actually a blog post, correct use of the word blog. And so the title of it is Sounding the Alarm on Compass's Interference with Oregon's Psilocybin Therapy Program. So that was in March of 2021. David, this is on Dr. Bronner's. If you just Google Sounding the Alarm on Compass, you probably bring that up. And so he linked to one of Shayla's earlier pieces, which is what we were just referring to, which was Can a Company Patent the Basic Components of Psychedelic Therapy? That was published on February 9th. In Bronner's blog post, he said, I wanted to flag here what isn't well known yet. Information that was provided to the Healing Advocacy Fund, which is overseeing smooth implementation of Oregon's psilocybin therapy Measure 109 in Oregon. According to this information, George Goldsmith, CEO and co-founder of Compass, recently started reaching out to several psychedelic researchers at OHSU, the Oregon Health and Science University, in an attempt to drum up concern and mobilize opposition to implementing 109 in Oregon. Okay, just keep in mind that is on March 13th. Shayla then came out with a piece on April 6th, 2021. That piece was in Motherboard, and it's called "Is It Possible to Create an Ethical Psychedelics Company?" In that piece, she then writes about Bronner's post on that. Shayla didn't write. Shayla wasn't the one to do this. It was David Bronner who published this. David Bronner is also a MAPS board member. So I can only speculate here. I don't know if Hamilton, I find it hard to believe that he didn't know the Bronner piece came out. And I don't know why he's going and blaming Shayla for this. Shayla just wrote about what Bronner had said.
Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that the way it was written didn't lead a lot of people to believe that that's what she was saying. And so tons of people came away from this article saying, how can you work with a company that's interfering with legalization efforts? And I never would. That would be a complete deal breaker, but there's absolutely no evidence for that. And what bothers me about it is then this becomes a distraction. Like, sure, if people want to hate Compass, they're going to. I can't stop it. But at least hate them for something real.
It's a great thing to say about your employer, too. Yeah, and it's the fact that he's saying that like none of the organizers even thought this. Like, David was an organizer, Bronner was an organizer. He was the biggest funder. I think they threw $2 million at 109, and then he put this out. It's still published right now. It's still up there. If this isn't accurate, I guess what I would say to Hamilton, if this isn't accurate, why don't you contact David to take take the article down. I don't know why there's this misdirected, like, I don't know if you want to call it anger at Shayla for covering something that is worth covering, that David Bronner, who's like, he's a powerful guy in this space and the soap industry and everything. I don't get it personally. Oh, and by the way, the one other thing here in my notes is that David Bronner sounding the alarm piece is the other piece where he for some reason he plugs he says in that same piece, this is unrelated to Hamilton stock, but I just wanted to point it out. He said, I was on a Zoom Tuesday evening with the remarkable psilocybin therapist Francoise Borzat and her daughter Nama Grossbard about their exciting plans to launch the Center for Consciousness Medicine, first in Oregon and the Netherlands, but soon around the world, training world-class facilitators and treating people that will for sure match and arguably blow Compass's approach out of the water.
We actually,
which is still up.
We interviewed David Bronner for Cover Story Power Trip. That interview didn't make it to daylight in light of other things that we had in the limited space and all of that. But holy shit, was that a train wreck? Yeah, hopefully one day that can get some airtime, as well as the full Doblin interview. But like, yeah, there's real problems there. Anyway, I know there's more from Hamilton.
All right, let's continue.
When you create these sorts of false narratives, it distracts people from real issues. They become completely fixated on imaginary problems. So I end up arguing with people about whether or not they interfered with Measure 109 when the people who actually organized Measure 109 don't even think that. And then all of this filters out into the mainstream media, and you get some unattributed copy of the Shayla Love reporting in the New York Times, which is the exact same good guy, bad guy narrative, where you have Carrie Turnbull posturing as the savior of psychedelic humanity, and George Goldsmith is the evil villain who's going to take psilocybin away from everyone. And this is just not really constructive for anyone. And so I want to give a concrete example of why this is a little bit damaging. So at the beginning of this year, the DEA announced that they were going to prohibit 7 psychedelic drugs. When the time came to challenge it, I reached out to everyone that I knew, trying to figure out a strategy to prevent this. When we were trying to figure out how to do this, there was a lawyer named John Hunter who offered to represent us, and Compass would have footed the bill for this defense, but I knew that if I accepted any money from Compass in this, it would then get distorted as some kind of nefarious scheme by Peter Thiel to something, who knows what, fill in the blanks. And so John Hunter had...
Has Peter Thiel even done anything objectionable?
No, I mean, has Compass ever footed money to fight the DEA doing anything ever? Like, what?
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know.
Sorry, go ahead, Normie.
We would have done good things, except that the bad PR would have negated the concrete reality of the good things that we were going to do, so we didn't do them.
I mean, it sounds like it would have been actually like great PR if they would have said no strings attached. Like we're coming after this. Who was going to go and say,
substances that we
Thiel.
have no? Yeah, these are substances we have no investment in. We have no nothing.
So let's throw some money at it. Fuck the DEA. That's Compass's tagline, right? Compass, fuck the DEA. I think I saw a website or something.
To work pro bono when we were able to raise a little bit of money. But I think this is just a tangible example of how these false narratives can have a negative impact. Here we are.
All right. I just want to point out that these false narratives having a negative impact, that DEA list was actually sent over to the DEA by HHS, my understanding, in 2012. It's 10 years ago that list was actually sent over, and the DEA did nothing with that for a decade. I don't know, it's speculation if the DEA is moving now because of like several critical articles. I find that insane to actually have a concern about that. That the reason the DEA pounced now is because there's this tiny little opening in a small handful of articles that are what is this, the Death Star? This is like a little vulnerability. Oh, Psymposia came out with a few things. Let's launch the 10-year-old list into like, what is going on here? I don't get it.
On the point of like false narratives too, he has consistently throughout this chat or this talk made his own sort of false narratives through exaggeration to make points. Like he keeps falling back on, oh, George Goldsmith isn't going to take your mushrooms. He's not going to come take your mushrooms. It's like nobody has ever been claiming that that's what George Goldsmith's doing. Like he's eliminating all the nuance from any of the issues and presenting them as like exaggeration.
I think that's the point.
Of the company that employs him.
Trying to prevent the prohibition of these scientifically valuable psychedelics, and I have to think about who pays the lawyer's fees because I don't want someone to accuse me of, I don't even know what, having some kind of weird ulterior motive. It's very annoying. It's not that these aren't valid concerns about patenting.
If the goal is to uphold and to do good work, who gives a shit what anybody's saying about you? Like if it's just going to be some like rumor mill nonsense that isn't actually meaningful and that is of less significance than actually challenging the DEA, like why not go ahead and do it anyway? Like I don't. It's an interesting weighting of issues.
I don't want to diminish or minimize all of this stuff, but the real concern that I have is that there are serious issues going on right now. More people died of drug overdoses last year than any other year in history. On top of that, you have basic issues with people not really understanding psychedelics very well, basic gaps in education. You have ecological concerns. As psychedelics become more popular, there's a real possibility that some of these plants and animals will be driven to extinction.
So I think, Pace, you had pointed this out. So there's a gap in education, so let's ban the educators from the event.
Yeah, I mean, what? Like Nishay has been teaching psychedelics classes for over a decade. We're developing educational programs at the Ohio State University. We're the only group that's developing a program that's specifically accessible to undergraduates. Like, what are you talking about? There's no prerequisites for the class that I teach. It's rigorous, refereed information that we're offering. I have people looking over my shoulder, making sure that I'm providing quality information for the tuition dollars that people have. Real quick, I wanted to address Queen Louise's the first question about whether or not like going to psychedelic science is worth it. I gotta say, we're talking about conferences. I went to my first psychedelics conference to see a particular speaker, somebody I thought was interesting, and I don't regret it. And I think we said at the beginning of this live stream that most of us met at conferences. So, I don't know. Would I go to Wonderland? Well, I mean, I didn't. And I guess we probably can't now. But
we can get in next year.
Let's just say that, not always is it the case that, a venue that is, not perfect is not worth attending to. I mean, there's a lot of factors to consider. Is it accessible to you? Is it nearby? Are there topics that are interesting to you that are worth exploring? If you check those boxes, I say go. Why not?
And in the specific case of MAPS' conference is a little bit trickier, I would argue, in the sense that
True.
There's a fundraising element, and so for people who have been harmed in clinical trials and kind of mistreated, there's a kind of until MAPS kind of comes kind of clean about their role in everything that people being harmed in their clinical trials, arguably supporting MAPS, people might have some question with that. I just want to put that out there as another thing to consider.
And also to consider that, if you've listened to Power Trip, and if you haven't, please listen to Power Trip, and you think that the things that were put forth on that podcast are important and worthwhile, go to a MAPS conference and straight up, I am Spartacus, the whole thing. They can't ban us all. Go ask questions.
We've gotten a bunch
that
of
are
emails
important.
of, and the funniest part about this is that we've gotten a lot of emails from people who are like, "Oh, can I be banned too?" You know, other outlets. and everything.
There's like some real strange professional jealousy going on. It's like it's not that sexy.
Yeah.
These people
Look,
hijacked
the
our
thing
entire
is-
week. We had
the
other
thing
shit
is-
going on.
I mean, behind the scenes, like everybody talks
Also
about
appreciate
microdose
you in
like
the
it's a
chat
joke.
there, Emma.
You know, it's
Let's
been nice
continue.
to see. Well, it's just been quickly. It's just been nice to see, how many supporters we do have. Like, we were nowhere looking at microdose, and we had so many people messaging us about what was going on and keeping an eye out and kind of informing us. So it just gets back to Joe's comment about how we have no friends. Like, clearly that's not the case. And just one quick thing about just maps in general. Like, it would be, from my perspective, like ideally, Rick Doblin would, acknowledge things that he's done and said. For example, when he spoke at Penn Nursing and said that he felt that MDMA should allow patients to ward off predatory therapists, like stuff like that, when you're working with very vulnerable populations, like should be, like, I think it's a low bar to say walk that line back, let alone all the other things. So those are just things I would, in the specific case of MAPS conferences, that I would advocate people at least think about.
Ooh, here's a fun one. If anybody goes, I think that in the response to the rumors about whether or not anybody was threatening physical harm to Rick Doblin, he said that some of our critiques were unfair. It begs the question: which of our critiques were fair? Anybody want to ask him that one? Thanks.
Continue.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Oh,
That
wait a
is going
minute.
to
First,
also
go on.
reflect very negatively on the psychedelic community if it occurs, generating more hand-wringing articles of one kind or another, but also will be bad for the earth. So there's two things to be concerned about there. For all,
I love that he talks about like the ecological issues when he's someone who's out on a gigantic platform promoting 5-MeO. That's pretty rich to complain about this shit when you were one of the popularizers of it.
all of the articles about product placement and hallucinations and the terrifying possibility that a chemist somewhere might patent something and it may hypothetically result in somebody making money, that there are very real things that we need to work on as a community. And if we allow any of this cohesion that people like Rick Doblin built into this community to disintegrate over things as trivial as success, then what?
I wonder if he actually really believes that.
Success for whom? Like cohesion for whom? Like go back. Let's talk about the silo bust. Like let's talk about Halpern. Let's talk about like who? What is the cohesion that Rick has built? Let's talk about Rick trying to get kids in the MAPS bulletin without parental consent. Like the amount of. Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick, before we get through this, Nishay, I think somebody's here for you.
Who's that?
Oh, I think we got a little Len shout out.
Do we have some lag here?
No, we don't have lag. No one's actually pressing the
No
button.
one responded.
There we go.
Leonard. Hi, Leonard.
But
All
I
right,
mean,
let's wrap.
Yeah, this is all the fact that Hamilton wants to equate like the actual issues, whether it's abuse or ecocide or poaching or whatever, and say like, oh, that's so terrible, but also, and bringing articles about that happening. It's like he wants it both ways, right? It's like he wants to say these are serious issues while also deriding the very people who are covering those issues. Like I think like it's ridiculous. And to then like claim that Doblin or anyone, that there is cohesiveness, that as Emma Stam pointed out earlier, that there is some sort of singular psychedelic community, like it's nonsense.
Well,
I
I'm
mean,
not sure how
Rick's
we're supposed to get to cohesiveness if we're, straw manning each other's positions as well. I think, engaging with the actual ideas is an important precondition for kind of coming into a greater understanding, but that's not going on here.
How can we be in community if we're not in conversation? How can we be in conversation if
How
the
can we be?
possibility of conversation is precluded from the get-go? Like, I want to point out that Sasha Cisco made the journey to Wonderland, Miami, having no idea whether or not, like, having no idea that they would just be like met at the gates with a no. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
All right, let's wrap this up.
Hope do we have of pushing this forward? The conclusion from most MK Ultra experiments, and even pre-MK Ultra, most Nazi medical experiments that were done in Dachau, was that these things are not very useful for military or interrogation purposes. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Do we want to talk about Kubark?
So-
Do we want to talk about
Yeah, let's talk about
methods
it.
and techniques employed at current and recent U.S. black sites? Like,
Yes, let's talk about it. So D. Ewan Cameron was one of the few witting participants, at a university level in MK Ultra. And MK Ultra, like, to be clear, is a continuation of experimentation that was happening at Dachau, that was happening at Unit 731 in occupied China, where absolutely horrific human experimentation data was taken over by our Central Intelligence Agency. Very likely, taken custody of by the OSS, the precursor to the CIA. D. Ewan Cameron at McGill University used psychic driving, used drugs, used barbiturates, used electroshock therapy to wipe people's personalities, to reduce them to infantile state, to render them incontinent. And his research was the basis for the Kubark counterintelligence manual used by the CIA to destroy communities, to torture people. Is this information used today? Well, Jose Padilla in 2006, Jose Padilla was somebody who was, he was a terrorist. He was somebody that the U.S. Military started interrogating. He was brought to these dark holes that nobody wants to be, and his lawyer said that the CIA gave him LSD. 2006.
I just wanted to point out in Naomi Klein's writing on the shock doctrine, she said that she claims that
Yes.
the whole mind control aspect was sort of disinfo that was put out by the CIA too. So, I
Right.
don't know the actual purpose was, various enhanced torture. I actually almost just said enhanced interrogation. I guess.
Yeah, right.
Child
Did you
post.
maybe
Ooh,
mention
gotcha.
stress positions or something? No. What Naomi Klein actually said about what the takeaways, the modern applications of decades of research was that effectively there was a scientifically based system for extracting information from, quote, resistant sources. In other words, torture. That's what came out of MK Ultra, and that is definitely still relevant to the world we live in today.
All right, let's continue.
Hey, I was wondering if you preferred journalism or chemistry as a profession, and why you made the switch from journalism to chemistry.
The reason that I made the switch is just the opportunity to do the chemistry. I mean, it sounds kind of weird to think, but there was, in the past, there was more money to make documentaries about psychedelics than to make psychedelics. Now there's more money to make psychedelics than there is to make documentaries about psychedelics. And I don't know how long it's going to last. I mean, everyone is already talking about, where the profits go. I don't know. There are no profits at this point. And some of these companies that emerged in the midst of this bubble are already gone. I've already seen it happening. And so I don't want to take any of this for granted. And so my take on it is, do as much work as possible while this exists. I hope it continues to exist, but if it doesn't, I don't want to waste this opportunity, because it's an amazing opportunity to invent a bunch of new psychedelics.
How do you even begin navigating the landscape
Hang
of
on, can we
misinformation
pause
that's
for a
going to
sec?
continue arising?
It's just, I mean, people tell you who they are, believe them. When people tell you what they're about, believe them. Like, I recently found the videos had been private on YouTube, but they're still up on various social media sites. Hamilton Morris's dad, Errol Morris, did a series of commercials with a company called Wealth Simple, which is like some Canadian money managing firm that's now like into crypto and other things. Anyway, there are some phenomenal interviews with Hamilton, and then there's one where he interviews his dad, and they sort of do a little role reversal and talk about their relationship and all of that. There's a truly delightful moment where he explains how his dream would be to have a swimming pool full of gold coins that he has accumulated effortlessly and can dive into like Scrooge McDuck. And he's here telling us he's gone from journalism, although in an interview with Michaela Peterson, he doesn't really see himself as a journalist. I suppose if he's doing it for money, that would maybe explain it. But this pivot from like journalist to chemist as a result of where the cash is, and that maybe he'd return to journalism at some point down the line, if somebody offered him a phenomenal sum of cash, which he says in another podcast interview.
Yeah, I was going to say, didn't he also do that say that to Mind Medicine Australia? Was that where he said that, or in one of his
No,
talks?
it was that other, it's the podcast that we highlighted in the article about Hamilton becoming a Compass Pathways consultant.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the
I remember
hilarious
that
part of
story.
that was that Michaela Peterson used the Wealth Simple image of him for the podcast, which
Wait,
just made me laugh.
wait,
when I
wait.
realized that.
Wait, who's Michaela Peterson? Who's this person we're talking
you
about?
tell us, Pace.
What's
Why,
this?
why don't you tell us? Yeah.
Michaela Peterson,
per-
something. Let's go. Let's move on.
Perhaps I'm not pronouncing it correctly. I think it's Mikhaila, who was named after
Oh,
Mikhail
sorry.
Gorbachev by the one and only Dr. Jordan Peterson. Yeah. Nishay, you listened to this podcast recently. You want to talk a little bit about it?
He actually did two of them.
I was going to say, Anand
Yeah,
just said
sure.
he accepted an interview. Oh no, actually two.
Yeah, no, I mean, there wasn't really much to say about. I mean, I just listened to the first one. And Dave, did you listen to the second one that he did?
Yeah, it wasn't super notable. I mean, some of
Well,
the
who's he? Who did what?
Hamilton
talking
went
about
on
Hamilton.
Michaela Peterson's podcast twice to talk
Yeah.
drugs and diets and xenon and whatever else. And then he appeared on Joe Rogan at one point and was basically saying how it's really unfair that Jordan Peterson gets all of this, bad publicity, and people just don't have empathy for public figures. And he seemed to gloss over Peterson's whole like transphobia and generally disturbing
Quickly, good
statements
night.
and sort of.
Good night,
Yeah, go
Leonard.
ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to say Leonard's leaving.
Totally.
Oh, mate.
So on the Rogan podcast, he basically says, "Oh, and then all of a sudden Peterson became a household name overnight and doesn't give any acknowledgement," which Pace has pointed out on numerous occasions was directly tied to pushing all sorts of transphobic bullshit.
I mean, that's why he's famous. Like Jordan Peterson was an academic until he abandoned academia, and he made his fame by punching down at trans people and telling lies about them, and that is how he rocketed to fame. And he's actively courting members of
Now
the
he's on
psychedelic
Ben
community.
Shapiro's network too, right?
He is Ben Shapiro's employee, as far as we can tell. Basically spewing right-wing propaganda. And just watch this space. I'm very sorry to report that Dennis McKenna was a recent guest on Jordan Peterson's podcast. I think that Jordan Peterson is actively cultivating people in the psychedelic space. So when you see somebody whose name is on some paper, who's a researcher in the psychedelic space, go on Jordan Peterson. You heard it here first. So
All right, let's wrap this up.
With the pop culture of psychedelics.
How to navigate the...
Yeah, where do we start?
I mean, this is like a basic media literacy issue that a lot of people don't have. And one of the most dangerous things a journalist can do is buy into people's preconceived notions, their biases. So people are already they want to prove that they're good, right? They're one of the good guys. They're against bad things. And so if you create a simplistic good guy, bad guy narrative, people will just buy into it and share it on social media to assert their own virtuousness. And it's often fine, but again, what happens if you're attacking something that doesn't exist, like Compass trying to shut down Measure 109 in Oregon? It just didn't happen. And then everyone is up in arms about it while not fighting for genuine drug policy reform. And my only advice is to approach everything with skepticism, because more and more people have conflicts of interest, including myself, by the way, but at least I disclosed it. But a lot of people have various conflicts in their discussions of this sort of stuff, and you have to think very carefully about why they're advocating a certain perspective, what they have to gain from it, what their sources are. It's a lot more work for the reader, but that's my main advice, is just read everything extremely carefully, because I have been shocked by some of the stuff that's getting published.
Let's just say that that last bit about reading everything carefully, I don't think that's super genuine. I think that the way that he treated a bunch of articles in the first place, very early in this talk, I think it's very clear that Hamilton doesn't think you should need to read certain things.
Yeah. I mean, and also from his coverage of, you want to talk about treating things with skepticism, we could talk about his coverage of the silo bust. We could talk about his highlighting of Crystal Cole. We could talk about his vehement online defending of Crystal Cole. I mean, hell, there's a DMT Nexus thread where I think he claims that we shouldn't refer to what Skinner and co. Crystal as well did to Brandon Green as kidnapping. It was more of a ransom. Putting aside the question of whether or not they ever asked for any money or anything in exchange for his release, I think at the point where you're trying to split hairs like that, you're probably wrong.
I mean, yeah, Picard had on his Free Leonard Picard site had the pre-sentencing report up there for quite a while too, which I'm not sure if it's still up there or if that site still exists. I haven't been on it in a while. Yeah, so that's the end of the breakdown of stuff.
We also just wanted to give a huge thank you to John Hanna for using Super Chat to throw $50 our way. Thanks, John.
Oh yeah.
I would say John was doing some of the kind of work that I think we do now well before we were doing it. Used to look up to the old Entheogen Review articles and coverage back in the day. So it's really wonderful to find some of that intergenerational solidarity.
Incredible to see.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I'll just mention as well, thank you for all the support, everyone just watching and hanging out. And, for those of you, if anyone knows anyone who does have extra to spare, our Patreon is patreon.com/Psymposia. And we just want to emphasize that we're a unfunded, we don't have grants or anything, we're a volunteer organization. So, considering that we are a group of volunteers that do this in our spare time outside of our day jobs. I think we've accomplished a lot over the past few years, but support definitely helps.
Especially when we're being accused of what, perhaps being violent towards other members of the psychedelic community by, I don't know, literal millionaires. Like that's a scary prospect.
Just a little bit. So yeah, any closing thoughts? Things that, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to make sure this is. I just wanted to throw the pre-sentencing report in the chat.
Great. And yeah, we've had a couple different people ask, so I'll just say again, we're going to throw up we'll throw up this whole video on the YouTube channel. I don't know that we, given that this is commentary and all of that, we have a fair use claim for sharing it. I don't think we can just throw up the Wonderland chat. However, I will say if you can find Wonderland's Vimeo, they have not password protected any of their videos, so maybe I'll throw that in the chat.
It's publicly
and anybody
available.
who wants to go,
Yeah, that's public.
Probably be best and
free to.
And also just quickly, Luca asked, is there a democratic aspect to your group? Can folks join? We've talked about maybe trying to revive our Discord at some point. I think at some point, I think that would be a good thing to do, because there are a lot of people that would like to kind of stay in touch around these issues and similar concerns. So I'd say stay posted on that. That's a hopefully future project.
There was somebody on
feel
Twitter
free.
recently that was asking, is there a place to go for people who, enjoy what Symposia's done? And it's been difficult to respond to those sorts of things. Like it's really important to emphasize that like the funding behind Symposia literally just comes from our Patreon. It keeps the website going. It keeps the lights on. No one.
Wait, hang on. Are you
All
guys
of us have
saying?
day jobs.
We're not funded by Big Pharma?
Well, I wasn't going to mention
to tell people
that I'm getting all the time. Jeez.
They're joking.
Yeah, we're joking.
I'm not joking.
No,
Somebody's gonna clip that. Somebody's gonna.
No, everybody knows
Let him run
that
with it.
Symposia is paid by the CIA. Like, of course, that's what's going on, right?
The conspiracies that are made up.
Don't-
about
I'm
it.
Don't
gonna
quote
clip
me on
these
that.
and
That's-
tweet them out first.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah,
So
we're-
the people
we're
speculating.
Satire.
We're all totally burnt out and exhausted, just like from doing all this. No, just genuinely. So it's like if we had more
That's
capacity,
true.
we would totally get the
Help.
Discord up and running yesterday. But absolutely, if there's anyone who wants to like reach out and has like excited about stuff like Discord, like absolutely reach out.
That's a good one.
You should spotlight Rich. Yeah.
yeah, more like Symposia CIA, am I right? But yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's just it.
The Sympo is actually silent in that case. Don't. It's a bad joke. It's a bad joke.
But
don't
yeah,
worry.
Yeah. Like, look,
that-
we were all minding our own business, and then some fucking millionaires came and tried to kick us in the head. So we had to organize and have a reply. Otherwise, like, some psychedelic celebrity gets to tell lies about us, in a place that we were specifically banned from attending. And guess what? That's not fucking right. And we're here to talk about what's going on, and that sounds like something that's going on. That sounds like something that's noteworthy. If corporadelic, if corporadelia is a word that means anything, what happened at Wonderland is exhibit like B, because exhibit A you're gonna have to go read like all of Russ and Dave and Normie and everybody's fucking shit on Symposia. It's Symposia has a whole corporadelic section. That's exhibit A. This is exhibit B.
But seriously, if there are folks who are looking to engage, like shoot us an email, hi@symposia.com. We'll do our best to engage when we can. The reality is, and that there's sort of like grunt work and behind the scenes stuff that is always backlogged. So it's there is a need to catch up on like real admin stuff, and I know it's genuinely not fun, but like if there's somebody who's interested, whether it's like a subreddit or the Discord, or you're interested in plugging in around some of that and helping make some of that go, that would be wonderful, because we're all flat out, and it sort of goes in cycles of starts and stops, and it would be great to have some help getting that moving.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I do think it's interesting.
Oh, and as far as ethical investors, no ethical consumption.
Military intelligence, yeah.
Yeah, it's really it's a nightmare. It's too what I would say is, if you're asking those questions, go check out the backlog of Psymposia podcasts, +3 podcasts. We cover a whole lot of corporadelic issues. We cover a whole lot of, there's one in particular where Normie and Russ and I talk about sort of competitive versus cooperative firms. I think that was at the DC Psychedelics conference. We also talk about Grow, Gather, Give. Like go through the backlog. Might answer some of your questions. Hopefully leave you with a whole bunch more questions. I agree, it is really sad. But if we don't talk about it, there's no way to like figure out how to engage with it, or what possible steps forward there might be. And beacon of hope is finding the other others.
Queen, yeah.
Sorry.
With the hope, yeah. Like, look, I want to point to actually the work of Yarlix Estrada, like, who regularly speaks to my class and talks about groups like DULF, the Drug Users Liberation Front in Canada. This is a drug users union that goes on the dark net and buys drugs, tests them, and distributes them. This is, we take care of us. This is doing things that the government is not going to do, that a corporation is not going to do, and they're not going to do it in 2024 or maybe 2026. They're doing it now. And they're doing so at great personal risk. But the fact is that we're already talking about, criminalized groups of people. Drug users unions are groups of people who started the very first clean needle exchanges. Groups like harm reduction outfits like Dance Safe were put out to protect the communities that they were, that they were a part of. So like an investor, I don't know. I'm not looking for that. But in terms of what is the beacon of hope, look around you. Who are you building community with? How can you reduce the atrocity a little bit in your little corner of the world? How can information, how can education help people that you know? How can you be a resource? That's the beacon of hope. It's you. Elon is not coming to save us, people.
Yeah. That's probably as good a place to end on as any.
Yeah, but
better than most, actually.
Follow us if you want to on Twitter. We have our group and our individual things that we do there. We have a mailing list if you're not on the mailing list. So Symposia.com, Symposia with a P, obviously. You can sign up there and keep in touch. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And Casey, I see you in the chat. I also still agree that it is very weird that they would ban us, even after all of this.
Yep. Yeah.
Till next time.
Well,
drink some water, folks.
Next time. Bye.
Night.